What's happening, guys? It's Cooper Carter here for G66, and on this week's Fractal Friday, I'm going to show you 3 quick, easy EQ tips that you can use to take your live tones to the next level. As guitarists, we are always searching for that perfect tone, whether it's a clean or a dirty, a rhythm or a lead. Any kind of tone is always a journey to get to. And even once we're there and we think we have a perfect tone, sometimes it takes a little bit more tweaking after that. But one of the most important things that I like to bear in mind when I'm searching for a tone or I'm dialing something in is that the tone that sounds great to you when you're alone in your studio or your rehearsal space or even your garage is not necessarily, and even maybe is almost never, the tone that's going to sound really good in the mix, whether that's on a record or live with a band. There can be some really different considerations to take into account when you're trying to sit in a mix as opposed to when you're trying to rip the paint off the walls in your practice space when you're jamming out by yourself. When you're playing alone, it's really fulfilling to have the guitar take up all the available sonic space in the room, and it's super rock and roll. But when you're in a mix, whether that's again on an album or in a live space, the high and the low ends of the sonic spectrum really are already occupied by cymbals or bass guitar. And you don't want the guitar muddying up those areas by adding layers where the guitar doesn't really need to be speaking. The guitar is, by its very nature, a very mid-ranged focus instrument. So there are some things that we can do with EQ to very quickly and easily take out all that extra information and really focus the guitar and let it speak right where it needs to be. Now, if you're the kind of player that spends most of their time jamming out alone, these 3 tips, and especially the first one, may not be super applicable to you. But if you're the kind of player that's looking to sit perfectly in a mix and really shine in that spot, here are 3 very quick, very easy tips that'll thread the fine needle of making you cut through the mix, stand out, but also meld seamlessly with the band. Okay, so we're going to start off with a simplified version of my go-to live preset. I've got 3 scenes, a clean, a mid-gain, and a lead. So here's the clean. Now those are 3 great tones to me, but the front of house engineer would probably do a lot to those tones to make them ready to sit in a mix. Now, where I'm sitting right now in my studio playing alone with my full range speakers cranked way up, I'm very satisfied with these tones. But there is admittedly a lot of bass content and a lot of high-end content that really doesn't need to be there. And you can see that if we put a real-time analyzer block in our preset here. I'm going to just add the RTA, and we can play, and you'll see there's a lot happening below 100, and there's a lot happening above 6K that really is just going to be interfering with the cymbals and the kick drum and the bass guitar. So the first thing I do to every tone that I take out live is to low cut and high cut the cabinet block. Now the benefits of this are twofold. Number one, if you're going into a PA, you're gonna make the guy at front of house really happy because he may not even have to do any EQing at all to your tone to get you to sit really nicely in the mix. The second benefit, which may be even bigger for a lot of players, is that if you are gigging with only an FRFR speaker on stage, so a full range flat response speaker instead of an amp, if you're playing like a club gig or a bar gig, and that is your only sound, low cutting and high cutting that FRFR is going to get you sitting perfectly in the mix. I hear from so many players that say they have dialed in a perfect tone in their rehearsal space, and then when they get to the gig, they're lost in the mix playing on stage with just their FRFR. And that is likely because you're not high cutting and low cutting their tones sufficiently so that the band versus the guitar becomes a volume war and everybody keeps turning up to try to make their parts cut, and then it turns into a giant muddy mess. So again, right off the bat, first thing I do for live tones is I go into the cabinet block. We're gonna start with scene 1 on cabinet channel A. I go into the preamp and I'm gonna use these low cut and high cut parameters. So first off, I'm gonna set the slope to 12 dB, so I've got a little bit steeper slope on my filter. And then I'm gonna low cut anywhere from 50 to 120 hertz. And this is entirely up to you and may depend on what you're monitoring through and really can change depending on what kind of tone you're dialing in. I generally find myself getting around 80, and that's where I like to start. 120 can be really aggressive for a lot of tones, but for some higher gain tones, that can be right where you want for the tone to sit. So let's hear the clean here without any low cut at all. And then turning the low cut up to about 80 here. Now you can hear that the core of the tone is very much still there. It really does not sound a whole lot different. And in fact, if you're listening on a phone or on a tablet, you may not hear any difference at all. I encourage you guys, as with all of my videos, to listen on the best speakers you can and listen at a pretty loud volume to really hear what I'm hearing here in the studio. So next up, we're gonna high cut. And again, this is entirely up to you and entirely up to the tone where you end up. Generally, you're gonna want a high cut starting from anywhere about 5K all the way up to 10K. I generally find myself living somewhere around 7.5, so 7,500 hertz, and that's gonna give us this kind of tone. Now again, if you are following along and dialing in your own tone here, you may now feel like your tone has lost a little bit of the sparkle, a little bit of the life, and a little bit of the air. That's an understandable perception, but again, this is the kind of thing that is going to get you sitting better in the mix because your guitar is no longer going to be stepping on the other instrument frequencies up there in the high end. So for a lot of players, these kind of adjustments that you're used to not hearing because they're being made by front of house and only heard by the audience can really be a lot to wrap your mind around because you're used to hearing these tones that are taking up a whole lot of the sonic spectrum and sound a lot more pleasing to you. But I promise that if you make these adjustments, you're gonna find that your tones sit a lot better in the mix and you're gonna be a lot happier. So I'm gonna go ahead and move up to my mid gain since I have a channel B in the cab here. So here's our tone again. And I'm gonna go ahead and low and high cut to the same values that I used before. And I think for this tone, I'm actually gonna go ahead and raise this high cut up a little bit and bring this low cut down just a tad. And that's sounding a little better to my ears. Now, of course, these are the kind of settings that if you have the benefit of dialing in while a band is playing or you're able to run backing tracks at the same time, you can really massage these values and take out a lot of the guesswork. I'm going with values that I know work for me, but again, there are wide ranges here that you guys can use. And now if I go up to my lead scene here, we can check the real-time analyzer and you can really see the effect of this low and high cut on our tone. There's a much steeper roll-off in the lows and the highs. And you can really see how the curve and the slope of those low and high cuts are affecting the tone. Much less information happening over here and over here. I have probably used this second little EQ trick more than any other trick in the Axe-Fx or FM9 or FM3, and we find it in the input EQ page of the amp block. Now, the input EQ page of the amplifier is a really nice way to affect the character of the amp. And I like to think of changes made here in terms of how the amp is speaking in the EQ spectrum as opposed to where. Now this trick is very straightforward. In fact, we can leave the frequency where it is, although you may find useful values between 900 and 1250. We can leave the Q where it is on 1, and I'm just going to take the gain up by about 3 dB. Now again, you may find different values work for you and you can try experimenting with anything up to 6, although I find that a little aggressive. But let's hear the tone without this little gain boost at 1K, and then I'll crank it up to 3 dB, and you can hear how this instantly adds a lift and a little bit of sparkle to your tone. I love what that does to the tone, and again, I put this on pretty much every live preset I use. It really adds a nice subtle cut, and it really just, to me, makes the guitar feel a little bit better under your fingers as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this into the other 2 amp channels here. I find this especially useful on leads, but again, I do generally add it to all of my tones. Now, again, this is entirely up to you how much of this you want to dial in. I have used values as high as 6 dB on this, but be careful if you use a little too much of this, it can start to sound honky. So if I go ahead and crank this up, it can start to sound kind of unpleasant. So I'm going to put this back down to 3 dB. Let's listen to our lead, especially with this. Here we are without the boost. This to me feels like an instant cheat code to livening up your tone. And finally, a quick trick using an actual EQ block. I'm going to turn this guy on here, and as you can see, I've programmed a 3 dB boost with a Q of 2 right around 2800 Hertz. Now between 2.5 and 3K is really where a lot of the pick attack and the transients of the guitars live. And so by either boosting or lowering this frequency range, we can add or take away pick attack. Now, too much boost here and your tone will start to sound really shrill and ice picky, and too much taken away here can really bury your guitar in the mix because all of the pick attack and transients are gone. So adding a subtle lift here can really bring out pick attack, which can be great for tones where you're playing riffs, or for example, cleans where you really want to hear the transient. And this can also be great if you're a shred type guy and you are doing a lot of alternate picking leads and you really want to hear the pick attack. Now, turn that coin over, or in this case, flip this curve over, and we now have a gain reduction at 2800, and we are taking away pick attack, which can be really great for guys going for a Joe Satriani or Eric Johnson vibe, where you really don't want to hear as many transients. So I'm gonna go ahead and in my clean scene, turn on this boost. In my mid-gain scene, turn on this boost. And on our lead, keep this slight reduction in pick attack so that my leads are a little more fluid and you hear fewer transients. Okay, so there you have them. 3 very quick, very easy EQ tips that'll have you slotting perfectly into your spot in a mix, but will also make sure that you are never lost in it. I hope you guys found these tips useful. If you did, please let me know in the comments below what you think and what you've been trying out with your own Fractal unit. Also, make sure to leave a comment if you'd like to see something on a future Fractal Friday, or chime in on the Fractal Friday forum thread, say that 5 times fast, on the Fractal Audio Systems forum. And if you want to get everything possible out of your Fractal Audio Systems unit, whether that's the Axfex 3, the FM9, or the FM3, visit classes.coopercarter.com to sign up for my complete masterclass series. For all things Fractal Audio Systems, keep it right here on G66. Make sure to subscribe, thumbs up this video, and again, leave me a comment letting me know what you'd like to see on a future episode, and I will see you guys next week on Fractal Friday.